The smoke had barely cleared from the first wave of American strikes when the comedians moved in. Not with rifles, not with bombs, but with microphones and punchlines sharp enough to cut through the fog of war that had settled over the United States. This is what happened on the set of CNN's Have I Got News for You, where the war in Iran became the most explosive material any comedy panel had ever handled. This is the story of how America's funniest voices responded to America's most controversial military campaign. On February 28, 2026, President Donald Trump announced the launch of a joint United States-Israeli military operation dubbed Operation Epic Fury, targeting Iran. Within hours, the attack had resulted in the assassination of Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with several of his senior aides, and the destruction of numerous military and security bases and installations. The Middle East had been set on fire. And back home in the studios of CNN, the cameras were rolling on something very different. Host Roy Wood Jr. and the Have I Got News for You panelists had been asked to joke around the Trump administration's series of decisions in the Iran war throughout the first month, from declaring victory to requesting international help. What followed was not just comedy, it was a running record of a war told through laughter, outrage, and disbelief. Episode by episode, decision by decision, as one of the strangest military operations in American history unfolded in real time. The first target the comedians locked onto was the name of the operation itself. Operation Epic Fury carried with it a Hollywood grandeur that immediately attracted mockery. Jon Stewart, on The Daily Show, mocked what his show dubbed Mesopotamia, America's next top muddle. He laid into Trump's inconsistent communication and lack of congressional approval on the issue. Stewart had taken aim at the manner in which Trump announced the strikes, pointing to the fact that the president had made the announcement from MAR-A-LAGO wearing a baseball cap. The image of a wartime commander making a declaration of military conflict while dressed like a man heading to a weekend round of golf was not lost on anyone in the studio. Stewart played clips from the 2024 election of commentators on the right saying that Trump would be a peace-through-strength president who would keep the United States out of war, followed immediately by clips of Trump supporters praising the strike, and commented that how quickly the right has gone from peace through strength to peace through war. On the set of Have I Got News for You, the war came through the television screen like artillery fire. Trump had not sought congressional approval ahead of the initial attack, and since then both Republican-controlled chambers had blocked War Powers resolution bids. This became rich material for the panel. The question of whether the United States was technically at war or whether it was something else entirely was one that the show's writers and panelists returned to repeatedly. The first episode segment was titled simply, Operation Epic Fury, Are We Actually at War? Then came the phrase that would define an entire phase of the conflict in the public consciousness. President Trump had downplayed the conflict with Iran as a little excursion. Roy Wood Jr. and the panel treated this with the kind of disbelief that soldiers on the front lines feel when orders make no tactical sense. A little excursion was how Trump described a military campaign that had already killed 13 American service members, destroyed Iran's navy, shaken global oil markets, and triggered a wave of Iranian retaliatory strikes across the region. Iran's top security official Ali Larijani said Trump must pay the price for the war it had provoked and that the United States was now stuck in the quagmire of its own miscalculations. While those words were being delivered with cold severity in Tehran, comedians in New York were delivering their own version of the same judgment, dressed in punchlines and studio lighting. The war created its own strange battlefield of language and framing. Trump issued an ultimatum to Iran over the Strait of Hormuz and then changed his terms twice. Each change in position was a gift to the comedy writers, who tracked Trump's shifting demands the way military analysts track troop movements. Iran expressed its preference to negotiate with J.D. Vance rather than with Trump himself, a diplomatic preference that the panel treated as both absurd and completely logical, given the circumstances on the ground. Jon Stewart blasted the president's flippant attitude toward his largely unfavorable military decisions. He singled out an instance that took place during a Fox News talk show called The Five, where Trump veered completely off course when anchor Dana Perino questioned whether the Iranian people were starving. While Perino noted the situation was upsetting, Trump reminisced about a lunch he and Perino once had together over a decade ago. The moment was the kind that, in wartime, defines public perception of leadership. On Have I Got News for You, it defined an episode. The conflict had grown serious enough that CNN itself began preempting the comedy show to continue its around-the-clock coverage of the Iran war. The show that was meant to make sense of the news through humor was being pushed off the air by the very news it was covering. Viewers were frustrated. Audience comments flooded in, with viewers writing that they were sick and tired of seeing this 24/7, and that they needed the laughs and diversion that the comedy show provided. The war had become so total in its media presence that even comedy had become a casualty of the news cycle. When the show did air, the material kept coming. Iran had launched over 1,725 missiles and 4,446 drones since the war started. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz had severely disrupted the global economy, and the possible entrance of the Houthis of Yemen into the conflict threatened the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, through which nearly 15% of all global maritime trade passes. The economic consequences of the war were being felt in every country on Earth, and the comedy panel did not shy away from the absurdity of this reality. A war launched without congressional approval, described by its commander as a little excursion, had managed to threaten the movement of a sixth of the world's traded goods. Before the conflict, the global airline industry had forecast record profits of $41 billion for 2026. With the price of jet fuel more than doubling, carriers were under pressure and scrambling to cope, with airlines ranging from Air New Zealand to Vietnam Airlines cutting flights. The reach of Operation Epic Fury extended far beyond any battlefield. It touched everything. 1 month after the start of Operation Epic Fury, Trump delivered a primetime address to the nation declaring that Iran's navy was gone. Their air force was in ruins and their leaders were dead. He called it a military achievement unlike anything ever seen in the history of warfare. The comedy panel had its own assessment. Trump had claimed the United States had already won the war with Iran while the war was visibly still in progress, while missiles were still being fired, while American aircraft were still being shot down, and while the global oil market continued to collapse. Stewart's sharpest line of the entire period came in a moment of simple clarity. "I can't believe our bombs are now smarter than our president." It landed in the studio like the kind of truth that comedy is uniquely equipped to deliver, the kind that a news anchor cannot say, that a senator will not say, but that the audience immediately recognized as accurate. The correspondents of comedy had reported the whole campaign. They had covered the launch from MAR-A-LAGO, the shifting ultimatums, the little excursion, the claims of total victory, the pleas for international help, the Strait of Hormuz standoff, and the growing list of American casualties. They did it week after week on a show that their own network kept pulling from the air because the news was too serious for comedy. And yet the comedy continued, because the war continued, and because sometimes the only honest response to what is happening in the world is to laugh at the people who caused it.